Hi folks, today I'm going to show you how to paint up this Flail Snail featuring an iridescent shell. Okay, so I started off by painting the shell in game color Chainmail, and you'll see how I make this iridescence a little bit later, but start off with a metallic to do the iridescence in this style. So just, painting it over with standard brush. I've got this on a wet palette. So there you can see that's one coat, and I actually did 2 coats of this to just make sure it was super even. And now I'm going through with Jokaero Orange to base in the body of the snail. Is that what it's called? I don't know. I'm trying to be careful not to get this on the shell so I don't have to go back and touch up that silver bit. And again, just with a standard brush. There you go. It's all based in. Now I'm going to go through and paint in the mouth. So this is with Mephiston Red. And I'm not being super careful here. I ended up not really getting much spill over, but I figured with that kind of, there's a little bit of a lip to the mouth, so I could go back and touch it up if needed. Now that that's all based out, I'm going back with Light Ochre, and this is about 50-50 watered down with water. I've got it on my wet palette and mixed in some water. So one thing to note when you're putting these paints on and you've watered down, they'll look a lot more saturated than they're actually going to. This dried down quite a bit. The yellow kind of went away and it blended into the orange, which was the look I was going for. And then I went through and dabbed all of these high points. I find with especially dotting things, I get quite a bit of paint on my brush and then just carefully touch it down. Not really trying to work in a circular motion or anything like that, just dotting the brush in. All right, so I'm going to do that with the whole body. Okay, so that's all done. Now I'm going through with Skrag Brown, and this is watered down 50-50, and I'm painting that bottom bit. I noticed with a lot of snails, like that kind of, the part that moves, like essentially like the foot ring, I don't know, snail anatomy, is a darker color. So I went through and I'm kind of doing this in lines. So I'm not painting solid, I'm just placing the brush carefully, pulling it down to give that kind of striated, is that the right word? Look to it. And I'm going to go all the way around with this, and I also painted the underside with that 50-50 shading just to give it a little bit darker. Now I'm going through with the shade of Fuegan Orange, painting this all over. Just really wanted those orange bits to deepen up a little bit. And you might be looking at this and going, oh no, the yellow's going away. Don't worry, I'm going to go back over that in a moment. I like to kind of do this, lay in a layer, then shade, then do a second layer in the same color. I find that, especially on some larger parts where I might not do the whole layer a second time, but kind of hit those really top parts, that adds a little bit more dimension to the painting. And now I'm going through with Agrax Earthshade on the bottom just to bring out the contrast there, pop it up. You're probably not going to see it much on the table because that's pretty far down, but I like to know it's there. And then also going back through and real quickly just pulling this over that bottom bit, whatever it's called. Now we get to the fun iridescent bit. So this I am using contrast Talassar blue to paint up this first section of the shell. And I pulled it onto my wet palette, didn't really water it down at all, and just pulling it over. This is a fairly watered down mix anyhow, and it kind of almost acts as like a watercolor in that it adds that color, but it doesn't really cover up much of what was underneath. So you are still getting that metallic aspect underneath that I think kind of gives a little bit of an iridescent look to it. I think it's a really cool way to do colored metallics or iridescence. And in person, it actually has even more of that iridescent quality to it. So there you can see. And I went back through and I did with the contrast in Terradon Turquoise, painted the very tip of the shell with that, and then having this on my wet palette, I began slowly mixing in that Talassar blue, so that the idea was that it kind of slowly transitioned from the turquoise at the very tip of the shell down to the blue at the base of the shell. So each kind of segment, I'm just adding a little bit more blue in there. Always when you're adding in colors to try and merge them, add a little bit at a time because it's easier to add than it is to take away. And see, I'm trying to get all those spikes there as well. And this goes on really quickly, and it's also important to work quickly with the contrast because I have found that it dries relatively quickly for kind of how watered down it is, and you can't really go back through and touch it up once it's been dried. So now I'm going back through with the Tau Light Ochre in the 50/50 water, and I'm just retouching up all of those stripy, larger fleshy bits, and then all of the speckles, those bumps along the sides of this snail. So that's going to kind of cause that yellow to pop out a little bit more. It's adding a little bit more depth because I'm not doing as much here. I'm kind of sticking to that center bit, and with the dots I'm being really light with, I've got a little bit less on the paintbrush and going through and just gonna do this whole thing again. So it's a step that if you want to save a little bit of time, you could base paint, then add the shade, and then do highlighting. I just personally like to take a little bit more time and do the double highlight. Okay, so there you can see I've gone through with that second coat, and now I'm going through with Evil Sunz Scarlet, and this is watered down to about 50/50 with water, and I'm painting the flails. Now, part of the reason I watered it down was that I didn't want it to be super extreme, especially I wanted a bit of a transition between the part of the stalk where it connects to the head and to the flail. So with this 50/50 watered down, you get a little bit more, it's not quite as thick, so it builds up that transition. There was actually one point that I found the paint had gotten a little too thick, so I just mixed in a little bit more water over to the side and did a little bit more transition with that. So there's one flail pretty much done, and I'll do the same process on the other 4. So there's all 4 painted in, and now I'm going to go back in with another contrast. This time I'm using Blood Angel's Red. I decided to try out this instead of a traditional shade, as I really wanted that saturated color. I didn't necessarily want to darken it up. And I'm pretty happy with this. You know, another interesting way to use the contrast, maybe not in its intended use, but as a way to layer over other colors to really up that saturation. So now I'm going through again with the Evil Sunz Scarlet, and I'm just getting the teethy, mouthy bits, whatever it is that I don't think snails really have teeth, but just wanted to add a little bit more depth to this mouth there, that thing. All right, so now I'm going back over with Evil Sunz Scarlet, and I'm just touching up the very edges of the flail and those little bumps on it as well, just bringing that out against the contrast Blood Angel's Red. And now I'm going through with Evil Sunz Scarlet and Pink Horror mixed together in about a 50/50 mix. Again, I'm doing those points. I wanted to kind of transition these points out into like a really vibrant pink color from that deeper red. So I'm gradually doing it, mixing the paint colors. I think that gives a little bit more of a transition. So now I'm going through with just Pink Horror. And this is, I didn't bother mixing this down because I'm doing such a small amount. And I'm really just doing probably about half of that point there. I'm not getting all the way down to the base so that there is that bit of transition. And it's really helping those points kind of pop out a little bit, add a little bit more depth. And to give the final bit of depth, I'm going through with a dry Changeling Pink and doing a quick dry brush on all of the very tips. I have very little paint on this brush and I'm kind of just pulling it across those tips. So you can see here that that really does make those flails, gives them some more depth and pops them out a little bit more. So they're more obvious that, hey, this thing has flails that it can attack you with. Whee! Alright, so there you go. It's all painted up. It's a little frustrating because it looks better in person than it did in these pictures. I played around with a little bit, but especially the iridescence and you can tell the difference between the turquoise and the blue a lot more in person than necessarily in these photos, but I'm pretty happy with it. So what other ways have you found to use contrast paint? Have you painted up this Flail Snail from the Reaper Bone set or a similar Flail Snail? I'd love to see some pictures of it, so tag us on Instagram or Twitter. A big thanks to our patrons, especially Joan. If you want to support our channel, you can head over to our Patreon page and check out the perks of being a patron. We make videos here every Tuesday and Thursday, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and especially if you know somebody who is looking for some beetle type metallic ideas of how to use contrast, go ahead and share this video with them. Alright, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Roll for Initiative. Bye! It is pouring down rain, so if you can hear that, I'm sorry.